Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
A few summers ago, my friend Lexi, not her real name, and I went on a road trip down from Virginia, where we both live, to Florida. We had such a great time that we went again next year, but this time we went to New York. It was so much fun just hanging out with her on the road for days at a time that it was a no-brainer to head off once again this summer, and this time we planned to road trip to Dallas and then Phoenix. It was the week after finals week, and we were all packed and ready to go. Lexi had just gotten her full license over winter break, so she was super excited to do some of the driving, which she did before anyway, but she was always so afraid of getting caught that it wasn't ever for very long. I drove over to her house and helped her throw all her bags into the trunk and back seat of my dad's old green and gray Subaru. Some of the bags were too big to fit in the trunk, so we threw them in the back seat, a couple duffels covering the footwells behind our seats, which wouldn't have been in the way of us reclining our seats to sleep on the nights we didn't have a motel booked. We had the whole trip planned out, everywhere we'd stop to eat, sleep, refill gas. By this point, we were practically pros at road tripping. With everything prepared and settled, we set off around noon. The route we had first went south, then cut through the middle of Alabama towards Dallas. We stopped for dinner in Birmingham, Alabama, about 8 hours into the trip. After that, we were going to drive the last 3 hours to a city just across the border in Mississippi, but we completely lost track of time, staying at the diner in Birmingham for like 2.5 hours. When we got back on the road, the plan was still to try to make it to the city in Mississippi, but after only an hour, I was afraid to squint too much at the other car's headlights and risk accidentally falling asleep. Lexi was also way too exhausted to drive, and neither of us really loved the idea of stopping in some random town in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, but we also didn't love the idea of getting to Mississippi just a few hours before the sun rose and having to keep driving on less than 5 hours of sleep. So Lexi took out her phone and I parked in the breakdown lane while she looked for nearby motels for us to stay at. There weren't many cars on the road so late at night. It was taking forever for the web pages to load on her phone, so I turned the car off and we sat in the silence of us both being just desperate to find somewhere to sleep. After a while and a few grunts of frustration from Lexi, I was about to suggest we just find somewhere to park and sleep in the car when a pair of headlights pulled into the rearview mirror. An old red truck, one with only the front seats, turned its hazards on and parked right behind us, and I turned to Lexi, expressing the same anxiety I was feeling. My hands were shaking a little when I went to put the keys in the ignition, and we drove away before whoever pulled in behind us could talk to us. I pulled off the interstate at the next exit sign. We don't even remember seeing a sign for the town's name anywhere on the off-ramp, just a pitch black night besides our high beams, and the trees and speed limit signs caught in front of them. The first road off the highway was empty and full of potholes that were felt but unseen. Lexi pointed on the map on her phone to a public park where we could park and sleep for the night. After maybe 20 minutes of trying to navigate the roads of this town without GPS, passing horribly decrepit homes and commercial buildings with faded signs, we finally found the park and parked sideways in the lot. In the headlights, we could make out a terribly run-down swing set, a slide, and a seesaw, all made of old, rotting wood. We made sure the doors were locked and spent the night in the car. Lexi and I both woke up the next morning at about the same time, 7:15. Sitting up, we both got a better look at the town we'd parked in. Across the street from the park, there was an abandoned house. Its windows and doors boarded up, and its front lawn was overgrown, up as high as the porch. Just next to it was a house with trash bags filling the front lawn all the way to the weed-infested sidewalk. Surrounding everything was a sparse, hazy forest, and the rest of town was some ways behind us. I turned the car on and tried to blast cold air, but all that came through was swelteringly hot. Desperate to get out of the heat and both starving, we fought the urge to leave that town as soon as possible and instead headed towards the center in hopes of finding somewhere to eat breakfast before we continued our trip. Traveling deeper into the town didn't show us anything better than what we'd seen before. Flat, barren, and almost entirely deserted, this weird town only got weirder when we found an old diner. The sign in the window said it was open, so we gave it a shot. Pulling into the parking lot, there were only 2 other vehicles parked, and one of them looked exactly like the red truck from the night before. Lexi pointed it out and suggested it might even be the same one, and that was weird, but we definitely didn't feel it was weird enough to raise any red flags in our minds. Stepping inside, we were met with a room only marginally colder than outside and a blast of air from a standing fan right beside the door. The diner was more like a bar with a few wooden tables pushed up against the walls. A jukebox was up against the wall playing some 80s rock, but it was hardly loud enough to contend with the 6 box fans they had affixed to every window. Sat in the corner of the diner, there was a man, maybe in his 40s or 50s, staring down at a cup. His hair was almost unignorably greasy, glistening in the sunlight poking through the shredded blinds of the window beside him. The whole diner reeked of cat piss, and I felt myself almost turning to leave when we were greeted by a woman on the other side of the bar. She asked what we wanted to drink, and I turned to Lexi, kind of hoping she'd be the one brave enough to walk away. Instead, she shrugged and joined the woman at the bar, sitting up on one of the stools. There were only 2 things listed on the menu for breakfast, and I hardly remember anything about what we ordered except that we both ate it very quickly and it all tasted stale. The man from before wasn't sitting at the table anymore when we left the diner, and I remember noticing that the red truck wasn't there anymore either. We hit the road and made it to Dallas a whole hour earlier than the route predicted and got a chance to do most of the things on our list. An uneasy feeling persisted in my stomach throughout the day, which kinda ruined most of our destinations, but I tried my best not to drag Lexi down with me. I had no idea what was going on, there was just a horrible feeling that I was always being watched, but every time I looked around I either saw nobody or there were so many people that I couldn't find whoever was watching me even if they existed. Then I finally saw him. We had just arrived at Reunion Tower in the afternoon. It was when we stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed I saw him, the man from the diner, his eyes staring right back at me through his long black hair. My heart dropped and I felt sick, almost collapsing into Lexi. The weight of the paranoia I'd been feeling all day came crashing down at once, and I could barely breathe enough to explain to her what I just saw. The idea that this guy must have been following us all the way from Alabama seemed to click in both our heads at the same time. The other people in the elevator looked disgusted overhearing our conversation, all about as disturbed about the idea as Lexi and I were. A woman and her husband offered to walk with us back to our car, and Lexi and I tried to decline, but they had already made up their minds about us, so they went with us anyway. I'll admit it, I felt a lot better in their company, especially since none of us saw the man again on our way back to the car. We thanked the couple and left as fast as we could out of Dallas, headed west towards Phoenix. This second night we planned would take us out into the desert of New Mexico, where we'd get a chance to see the Milky Way galaxy and stargaze. It was around midnight that we reached the road we scouted on Google Maps. Lexi parked the car on a stretch of empty road and we stepped out into the quiet night, and the sky was beautifully clear. We soaked in the night sky for as long as we could before sleep started to overcome us and we got back in our car. An hour passed and Lexi was fast asleep, but I just couldn't sit still. I was tossing and turning and my heart was pounding with paranoia, and a bad smell kept wafting past my nose, and I really couldn't manage to get any shut-eye. Eventually, exhausted, I sat up in my seat, lifting the back and staring out at the road. My eyes darted all around the dark night horizon, looking for something to explain this feeling that has now followed me from Dallas. Like someone is still watching me, like I'm not safe. My palms are getting clammy and I bite my lip, my gaze flickering up at the rearview mirror where a set of headlights have appeared over the horizon. With my heart lurching in my stomach, I quickly stuck the keys in the ignition and hit the gas, desperate to escape this feeling and whoever's following us. Was that car following us? I didn't know, I didn't care. I had this awful feeling in my gut, and I wasn't going to just lie around and wait to find out why I was feeling it. Lexi jerked awake as I hit the gas, but didn't have many questions when she saw the headlights behind us. When the maps finally loaded, I found the nearest motel, which was about a half hour away, but I wouldn't have cared if it was 4 hours away. I didn't feel safe sleeping in the car at all, and with that car already long gone behind us before I even reached the highway, I suppose I was just waiting for any excuse to get up and out of there. I triple checked that the door to our motel room was locked before collapsing onto the bed and passing out as soon as the adrenaline wore off. Lexi woke me up the following morning all distressed, pulling me out of bed and up to the window. Can you guess what was parked a few spaces away from our car. That exact same red truck from the interstate and the diner. I already started to feel a little less crazy for not taking any chances with those headlights the night before. Desperate for answers, we left our motel room to scope the red truck out. It took every ounce of courage that we had to just approach the truck. We nervously peered inside. It was messy, full of fast food wrappers and soda cans and napkins, and a pale grime was forming on the edges of the windows, probably from smoking. Importantly, however, the man from the diner wasn't inside. Shaking, we checked out of the motel and hit the road, hoping that he might still be asleep in his room and won't know where we're going. I'm starting to get really paranoid now, and Lexi is trying to calm me down and drive at the same time. I tell her we shouldn't go to Phoenix anymore, thinking maybe this guy knows our plans, but she tells me that's ridiculous. I remind her that he's already followed us all the way from Alabama, but I can tell she's starting to get really irritated. She doesn't want to hear me suggest we turn back, and I could hardly blame her. I was also pretty angry at the idea that this trip would be ruined, because some creep decided to ruin it, but I also didn't want to end up in the newspaper. Regardless, she managed to soothe me enough to be on board with the idea of staying on track and finishing our road trip. We crossed the state of New Mexico and ended in Phoenix, Arizona at around sunset. Even despite the tensions and stresses we both shared, I think that it would have been impossible for us to both sit in still silence for 10 whole hours. Eventually, we started talking again and getting back into the good vibe that we were seeking in this road trip in the first place. We started to joke about the creepy guy following us, saying we must be drop dead gorgeous for someone to chase us across 5 states. Although each quip had an undertone of discomfort, we were trying really hard to move on and have a good time despite it all. In all the long stretches of empty desert freeway, we didn't see that truck once, and in the way the panic died down as the day went on, we really were starting to enjoy ourselves once more. At one point on the road we were starving, hoping still to make it to Phoenix before the sunset, and also perhaps a bit afraid to stop driving in case that red truck catches back up with us. Lexi told me she had a box of granola bars in her bag in the back seat. I reached back and unzipped it, taking the open box out and bringing it into the front seat. Lexi paused with a weird look on her face and asked if I had opened the box, to which I said I hadn't, and to which she said she must have opened it and forgotten. But with the look on her face, it was clear that she didn't really fully believe herself. Those kept us going until Phoenix, where we stopped at a McDonald's and headed inside for a chance to stretch our legs. We ate fast and left to head to the motel and check in, but when we did, we were told they were completely full. Lexi was starting to lose her mind as we drove around the city trying to find another motel within our price range that wasn't completely occupied. When we eventually found one, we went inside to find one of the beds soaking wet for literally no reason. Full of exhausted anger, she stormed down to the clerk and practically screamed at him. He offered her a new room at no cost, but she just stormed out and back to the car, so I followed her. We got into the hot car and she had a breakdown, sobbing into the steering wheel. I tried to console her, but the truth was I was almost surprised I wasn't crying right there with her. I was able to keep my composure and we switched seats, and I drove us out to find somewhere to sleep in the car for the night. We lied there in the car, the engine half on and AC blasting freezing air to keep the interior habitable, and just grieved our ruined road trip. Tried to make the plans up to think of another time this summer we might get a chance to give it another go. Eventually she fell asleep basically mid-sentence and I tried to follow suit. The street lamp a few yards behind the car dimly illuminated the roof of the car as I stared up at it. That terrible smell crept back into my nose, but it lingered instead of wafting past. It was like a mix of vinegar and sewage, and I almost gagged, covering my nose and mouth with the shirt I'd taken off. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and that feeling came back, here, a state and a half away from where we last saw that truck. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't rest my mind once again. I groaned and rubbed my eyes vigorously, pulling the seat back upright. It hissed like a gasp as it pulled up and I paused, quietly turning towards the back seat. Lexi's seat was reclined back over her bags that covered the footwell completely, obscured it absolutely. Trembling, I shook Lexi awake. She opened her eyes and I silently hushed her. She sat up and I pointed at the bag just behind my seat. I turned the AC off and we both stared. The bag rose and fell with a hushed breath that wasn't either of ours. Horror pulled at her eyelids. A scream climbed her throat, but she bit her lip as her eyes started to water. Her nails clattered against the door handle as she panikedly threw the door open and leapt out of the car. I rushed out right after her, but before I closed the door, I pushed my seat back down and nearly tripped into the road as I stumbled out. Lexi was already pacing up towards the lamp, and I threw my shirt back on as I rushed to the sidewalk at her side. She was hyperventilating and cursing, and I took my phone out, barely able to dial for 911. It was just then that I started crying, trying to explain what we both just thought we saw. A man was hiding in the back seat of our car. I threw up in my mouth and sat down to catch my breath. Lexi couldn't stand still and couldn't muster a single coherent sentence, just pacing and staring back at the car, waiting for the police to show up. A few cruisers showed up and the police called for the man in the back of our car to step out. When nothing happened, they opened the doors and paused, pulling him out onto the street to administer CPR. The man had long, greasy black hair and laid strewn out lifelessly on the asphalt. They pronounced him dead at the scene, having suffocated under my reclined seat. Tucked away under our seats, they found a small knife and some zip ties, and the thought of what he might have done had I allowed myself to fall asleep brought me to my knees, relieving sick on the sidewalk while Lexi tried to comfort me with her trembling hands. We stayed in a hotel for a couple days while my dad drove over to pick us up. He had the Subaru towed back and Lexi and I both just went home. I don't even know what to do with myself at this point, honestly. I know it isn't my fault, but I can't help but feel horrible for not catching on sooner. I feel really stupid, I don't know. I've been free for exactly 2 days, 12 hours, and 17 minutes. Not that I'm counting, actually that's a lie, I am counting. Every second feels like a miracle and a nightmare simultaneously. Every tick of freedom is weighed down by what I know and what I can't bring myself to tell anyone. 3 years. That's how long I was held in that basement. At least that's what they are estimating at the hospital due to my blood work. Time blurred together in that windowless room, marked only by the steady drip of a leaking pipe and his footsteps on the stairs. That drip, that goddamn drip. Sometimes I would lie awake counting them until I reached thousands, feeling my sanity slip away with each watery pulse. I don't remember who I was before, not anymore. The worst part is knowing that I used to remember. For the first few months of captivity, I clung to my identity like a lifeline. I had a name, I had a home, I had people who loved me, I had a life. But he couldn't stand it when I'd recite these facts to myself in the dark. He'd fly into rages when I'd whisper my real name over and over like a prayer. "You're no one," he'd scream, bringing his fists down on my head, my face, my temples. "You're mine now, nothing else." The doctors at the hospital believe I have severe brain damage from repeated trauma. Scans show old fractures in my skull that healed without medical attention. Dark patches on my brain where blood pooled and scarred. Memory centers damaged beyond repair. Now the police ask questions I can't answer. Did I have family, friends, a job, a home? The only clear memory I have from before is standing outside a Trader Joe's, nearly dropping a paper bag of groceries as one of the handles ripped. It was raining lightly. I remember thinking I should have brought an umbrella. Then a hand clamped over my mouth, a bag over my head, the smell of chemicals, darkness. When I woke up, I was in that room. Concrete walls stained with substances I tried not to identify. A thin mattress on the floor that reeked of mold and worse things. A bucket in the corner that he'd empty only when the stench became unbearable even to him. A single light bulb hanging from the ceiling that he would turn on and off at random intervals, destroying any sense of day or night I might have clung to. The first month I screamed until my vocal cords shredded. I clawed at the door until my fingernails tore off, leaving bloody streaks on the wood. I begged whatever God might be listening to either save me or kill me. Neither happened. He never told me his name. I never saw his face clearly. At least, for the longest time I didn't see his face. Not that finally seeing it helped. I'll explain soon. He always wore a mask when he came down, a plain white medical mask at first, then more elaborate ones as time went on. Sometimes animals, sometimes cartoon characters. The Mickey Mouse one was the worst. He'd wear it on days he decided I needed to be disciplined. I won't describe what that entailed, I can't, not yet, maybe not ever. It was painful, horrific. That cheerful mouse face watching as he told me I was his masterpiece, a true blank canvas, that humans should be grateful for lives that are full of endless opportunities. Once he didn't feed me for 2 weeks, just water. By the end I was hallucinating, seeing shadows dance on the walls. When he finally came down with a plate of cold spaghetti, I wept with gratitude. I kissed his feet. I would have done anything. I did do anything. The strangest part was how routine it all became. The terror never fully subsided, but it evolved into something duller, more manageable. Sometimes he'd bring me books, dog-eared paperbacks with coffee stains and torn covers. Sometimes he'd sit in a folding chair and make me read to him, correcting my pronunciation instantly when I stumbled over words. Sometimes he'd leave a small radio that only picked up static and religious broadcasts. The preacher's voices became as familiar familiar as my own thoughts. When winter came, I could tell from the bone-deep chill that seeped through the concrete. He'd bring down a space heater sometimes, but only if I'd been good. I learned to stop shivering in his presence because it annoyed him. I learned to regulate my body temperature through sheer will. I learned things about survival that no human should know. I stopped asking why. I stopped begging to be released. I stopped speaking altogether around the 2-year mark. What was the point? The silence became my armor. He hated it. He'd scream at me, shake me, try anything to make me talk. But I'd retreated so far inside myself by then that my body was just an empty shell. Sometimes I would watch him from somewhere above, like I was floating near the ceiling, observing this broken girl with matted hair and skin stretched tight over protruding bones. The worst times were when he was kind, when he'd bring me a warm blanket, when he'd clean the infected cuts on my legs with surprising gentleness, when he'd read to me as I drifted off to sleep. Those moments confused me, made me question everything. Stockholm Syndrome, the hospital psychologist called it later. I call it hell. Then, 2 days ago, he came down the stairs without his usual measured steps. He was rushing, frantic, no mask this time, and his face, I know he wasn't wearing a mask and it was human skin, but no eyes, no mouth or hair, no ears or nose, no features at all, just a blank canvas. That's all I remember about his face. Time to go, he said, injecting something into my arm before I could react. As consciousness slipped away, I heard the basement door open again, shuffling, a muffled cry, another person. Your replacement has arrived, he whispered in my ear. I woke up on a park bench 20 miles from the house where I'd been held. My hospital bracelet says Jane Doe. The police have been kind but frustrated by my inability to provide details. I can't describe his face even though I finally saw it, but I remember his voice, the way it would soften when he was about to hurt me, the slight lisp on certain words, the wet sound of his mouth when he leaned close to whisper things he planned to do to me. It's strange how my brain protected some memories while obliterating others. The neurologist explained that severe, repeated head trauma can create a patchwork of memory loss. Your brain sacrificed your identity to preserve your survival instincts, she told me. Sometimes I still feel the phantom pain of those blows, the ringing in my ears that wouldn't stop for days, the world tilting as I tried to hold on to who I was before everything went dark. And last night, as a nurse was checking my vitals, I heard a news report on the small television in my hospital room. A 19-year-old girl had gone missing outside a Trader Joe's, one town over from where we are now. I should tell the police everything I know. I should help them find her. I should be doing something, anything. But I can't. I physically can't, because as he was preparing to release me after I'd heard those muffled cries from upstairs, unmistakably female, young, terrified, he grabbed my face with one gloved hand, squeezing until I thought my jaw would break. Listen carefully, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. You're going to leave here, you're going to stay quiet. If I see one police sketch, if I hear one whisper that you're helping them find me, I will cut her throat while playing a recording of your voice. She'll die believing you killed her. He showed me a phone then, replaying snippets of my voice he'd recorded over the years. My pleas, my screams, even my reading voice from those bizarre sessions where he'd make me read aloud from classic novels for hours until my throat was raw. I've already told her all about you, he continued, how you helped pick her, how you're my partner. She thinks you've just gone out for supplies. His tone was nothing less than excited. She's waiting for you to come back, for 3 years just like you waited. But here's the thing that keeps me frozen, the thing I haven't told anyone until now. When he released me, he whispered something else. You did so well, I'll be coming back for you. This is just intermission. And remember, her blood will be on your hands if you talk. And on my discharge papers from the hospital, tucked into the folder the nurse gave me this morning, I found a small note on Mickey Mouse stationery. Miss you already. The new girl isn't nearly as much fun. She keeps asking when you're coming back. I told her you'd return soon to help me with her. TikTok. Along with the note was a small USB drive. When I plugged it in at a library far from the hospital, it contained only a single video file. 10 seconds of footage showing a young woman, blindfolded and gagged, huddled in the same corner of the same basement where I spent 3 years. A timestamp on the video showed it was recorded just 4 hours ago. In the background, my voice. Pieces of recording stitched together saying, "Don't worry, I'll be back soon. We're going to have so much fun together." I've been free for exactly 2 days, 12 hours and 23 minutes, but I know I'm still not free at all, and neither is she. Just some background on this story. I, a 24-year-old female, was about 21 at the time, and commuting a decent distance to school from my parents' house. My parents live in a small town, and based on what I observed in high school, the dating pool there is slim. A couple years ago, I was still adjusting to the adult dating scene. I was using Tinder, and though I had been on a few dates and had a few hookups, it was mostly just situations where I either wasn't that interested in the guys, or it was strictly a one-night stand. There's a college town, not where I went to school, about 45 minutes from my parents' house, and I went on a few dates there. It's a cool city to hang out in, so it was always worth the journey even if a date didn't work out. The worst Tinder date I'd had at this point was one guy that went in for the kiss when I clearly wasn't feeling it. Like, I cringed away as he went to kiss me, so his mouth caught the edge of my mouth as I turned away while trying and failing to not make a face. Very awkward, but by no means something where I felt my life was in danger. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. However, this story's different. We chatted through text after matching on Tinder, and though he wasn't exactly my usual type, he was charming enough. He was a little bit of the stoner type, and as a teenager I'd gone through my own emo phase. He was funny and confident over the phone as well. I usually made it a rule for myself to chat on the phone at least once or twice before meeting up with guys, even just to gauge if we would be able to carry a conversation. It's not the same when you're only texting. However, this was also to make sure the pictures and the voice matched up with the person I was meeting. We hit it off over the phone well enough to the point where I felt we should give hanging out a shot. We talked about how I went to karaoke night often at a local bar close to where I attended school. He said he and his friends liked going to karaoke too. Great. He lived in the previously mentioned college town, and I agreed to attending karaoke night with him and his friends. He said they were hanging out at a local coffee shop near where he and his roommate lived, and I could meet them there. A girl he knew worked there as well, and he said she'd give me a coffee on the house. Before leaving, I texted one of my friends where I was going just to be safe. When I arrived, I could clearly see into the coffee shop. I could see a group of 4 scraggly looking dudes and one girl behind the counter. As soon as I pulled up, I got a nagging bad feeling in my stomach. As soon as I got out of my car, the guy I had been chatting with left his group and came out. He said they were leaving right now, so we should just go. Not that I really cared about the coffee, but what happened to the coffee I was promised? I asked what exactly the plan was, and he said they were going to head back to his place before heading to karaoke. He didn't ask if I wanted anything from the shop, and didn't even ask if I wanted to come in. By this point, his friends came out and they all got close to my car. I was getting pretty bad vibes at this point. He isn't acting charming or funny like before on the phone. Everything felt forced. There was an air from the group that they were only pretending to be friendly. Nobody introduced themselves, but they just kept saying how awesome karaoke at the bar was. The girl inside at the counter had gone in the back of the shop, and because she was friends with them, I didn't know if I could trust her. Thinking quickly, I said the plan sounded great and I could drive and meet them there, that I didn't want to leave my car there. This apparently was a problem. The one car in the parking lot, which I had assumed was one of theirs, was the girls. They said they walked there, but it would be a lot better and faster if I just drove them back to the house. At this point, I'm panicking. Everyone's close to my car and me. I tell them a stupid lie and say that I have a bunch of stuff from school in my car, and it's pretty messy on top of that, so not everyone will be able to fit. Mind you, they are right by my car, standing in front of it. They can see through my windshield into it. It's got like a backpack in it, and that's it. I just lie and say I'm kind of embarrassed because the floor is messy. I'm saying anything I can to get out of this. I tell them I'm really sorry, but if they order an Uber, I can just meet them at their place. I'm not budging on not letting them get in my car. The guy I'm supposed to be on a date with tells the other guys to head back inside the coffee shop, and now I'm alone with him. He asks why I can't just drive everyone. He tells me it's not a big deal and that it's just easier if I drive everyone there. I stand firm that there's not room and my car's messy. I tell him I promise to meet him at his place if they order an Uber or walk. Just text me his address. He says that it'll take too long to get back to his place, so I should just meet them at the bar instead. He won't give me his address. He texts me the address to the bar, and I apologize about the car thing. I tell him I'm so excited for karaoke and I'll meet him there. I smile and act as naturally as possible, and then I get in my car and try to drive normally while in view. As soon as I'm out of sight, I take off and just drive in different directions haphazardly before heading back home. home. I was constantly watching in my mirrors to see if anyone followed me, and thankfully nobody did. Not long after arriving home, I got multiple texts from him. He told me I was just another girl pretending to be a nice girl. He told me I deserved to have my intestines ripped out and that I should be hung from the rafters by them. He told me when I was going to burn in hell and my sins against mankind would come back to haunt me. Clearly, I made the right call. People, always trust your gut. If you get a bad feeling, listen to it. You don't have to be nice. Do what you can to take yourself out of the situation and let your friends know where you're going ahead of time. Who knows, maybe the guy was ultimately harmless, but that's a risk I was not willing to take. I blocked his number and blocked him on Tinder. Never heard from him again, though I doubt I'll ever encounter him again. Creepy Tinder guy, let's not meet. I grew up in the exurbs of western Louisiana. Our small town was deeply religious, and this coupled with the crime wave of the 1980s meant that my childhood was spent largely cooped up inside. The first lick at freedom I got was Halloween night 1987. I was 13 and was allowed out until midnight with a group of my closest friends. What really sold my mother on the idea was Patrick. Patrick was the 17-year-old brother of my best friend Marv. Despite being feared by anyone younger than him, he was a good student and a good Christian, and all the adults he knew would fawn over him. Against his own will, he'd be accompanying our little group for the night. It was in Marv's family's basement that we watched the first half of Friday the 13th. Looking back, I'm sure I thought in the moment that that movie would be the most traumatizing thing I'd see all night. When Patrick entered the room, our laughter died mid-sentence. He wasn't tall, but carried himself like he was. I never liked him, but knew that not even his presence could bring down my mood tonight. After Marv's parents forced us out, we patrolled the neighborhood trick-or-treating. I think there were about 5 or 6 of us, not including Patrick. I knew all the other kids from either church or school, apart from Lenny, the kid brother of my friend Rob. I never knew, but I'm sure he was only around 7 or 8. I did remember that he was dressed in a clown costume. Apart from Lenny, the only other costumes I could remember were mine and Marv's. We both came dressed as Ghostbusters, and I'd brought an old black painted vacuum cleaner with me to really make it. It was after 10, after the trick-or-treating, that maybe 1 or 2 of us left the group to go back home. We all were giggling and messing around, high on sugar, not noticing that Patrick was leading us a little further away from the rows of white houses. The streetlights grew sparse, then vanished altogether. The laughter that had carried us through the night faltered, replaced by the crunch of dead leaves underfoot and the distant rhythmic croak of bullfrogs. The air thickened with the smell of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. I remember Marv nudging me, his grin faltering for the first time that night. "Dude," he whispered, "where the hell is he taking us?" There was a small marshy clearing on the banks of the bayou. Large, thick roots served as makeshift benches which Patrick directed us onto. Confused, we sat in a crescent around him and watched in terror as he took a cigarette from his pocket, lit the end, and took a draw. He blew smoke into Marv's face and started to talk. He told us all that he had a story he wanted to share, a local legend that every kid in town should be aware of. We listened intently as he began telling us about Leatherskin. The story will always stick with me, and I will now try to repeat it as accurately as I can. I might miss out some of the details. It has been 38 years after all, but this will be the truest account of the original myth on the internet, as far as I know anyway. Leatherskin was born sometime in the late 40s or early 50s. Deformed, coarse brown calluses grew all over his body like spreading mycelium. His pus-colored eyes were nothing but tiny pinpricks, and the full set of teeth he was born with were too sharp to be breastfed. His father, the town's pastor, was terrified that his child was a satanic aberration, punishment for the sins of his youth. Despite his ailing wife's pleas, the pastor took his newborn to a murky corner of the swamp and left him in a patch of moss to die. By this point, Patrick had already piqued my interest. At 13, I'd already heard the name Leatherskin whispered before. I heard it from a kid in the playground when I was much younger, in the context that he was going to get me. It was a small part of local lore that I honestly knew nothing about. I didn't even know what Leatherskin was supposed to look like. On that Halloween night, I was ecstatic at the idea of finally getting to know. Unbeknownst to the pastor, he left his unwanted infant crying within earshot of a dilapidated shotgun house. The wooden shaking that was slowly sinking into the bayou was inhabited by an aged and dementia-ridden woman. She wandered from her home and followed the cries to that little patch of moss. When she found the baby, she took him in her arms and cradled him to silence. That night, she brought him back with her and raised him as her own. For years, she fed and clothed him, cared cared for and nurtured him and did her best to keep him from harm's way. The senile old woman was barely able to speak herself, and, with no other human contact, Leatherskin grew up without a proficiency in any language. His diet consisted of raw seabird and other hapless swamp creatures until he reached puberty. By 13, Leatherskin was already almost 7 feet tall and had just begun to sneak out of his mother's home and into the small town on the other side of the overgrowth. He'd stalk through the backyards at night and kidnap family pets under the cover of darkness. This became his new routine, but as Leatherskin grew, so did his hunger. Sometime in the mid-1960s, a small girl wandered out into the swamp chasing a monarch butterfly. She was never seen again. From this point onwards, all sympathy had drained from Leatherskin's story. After his first feed on children's flesh, he could not go back. Kids began disappearing at a rate far higher than the national average. After the discovery of some semblance of human remains, the townsfolk would propound that these poor children were falling victim to alligator attacks. Hunts began soon after, and although many reptiles were killed, Leatherskin remained out of sight. The parents, however, stopped letting their children play outside, and especially not near the bayou. Leatherskin was forced to venture further into the small village and even broke into houses from time to time. It was after one of the Calloway twins disappeared from the edge of the schoolyard that people stopped saying gators and started to nail their windows shut instead. By this time, he had begun to spend much of his time in the water, clambering from root to root in the murky shallows. Anyone who did encounter him might have mistaken Leatherskin for a floating log or even a crocodilian. Few would have realized how close to death they'd come. Some hunters might have even seen the rundown cabin Leatherskin called home. It rested half sunken where the marshland met the slow running waters of the bayou. It was built by the father of Leatherskin's elderly adoptive mother, sometime in the 1870s or 80s I'd reckon. Back then, where it stood was dry land perched on a small riverbank. With more attraction, it could have developed into a township, taking the place of the one I called home a mile northwards. Shortly after the end of segregation, and immediately after Governor Wallace's loss in the 1968 presidential election, racial tensions in the state of Louisiana were at a fever pitch. Following more sightings and even a blurry photograph of Leatherskin, the highly fantasized story the local newspapers ran with were of a Creole cannibal living deep within the swamp. A racist mob was whipped up, and in one warm July night they descended into the quagmire, accompanied by the sheriff's men. By foot and by boat, the crowd came across Leatherskin's decaying house. Raiding it, they found only the senile octogenarian who'd raised the young demon. She was alive, but unresponsive, as she had been for the past 2 years. In that time, she'd been kept alive, fed, and bathed by her de jure offspring. The gang of men soon realized she wasn't the sole occupant of the house, however, as the wooden frames weren't the only things rotting away. Led into the cramped upstairs by stench alone, they found piles of small bodies, most picked down to the bone. In the ensuing interrogation, the old woman sadly died. This was the beginning of the account from the sole survivor of that night's events. Once he regained speech a few days after, he told the reporters encamped around his hospital bed that shortly after, the door was ripped from its hinges. A blur entered the shack and tore the group of men apart, shrugging off gunfire like a metal drum as he did. The lone survivor, a teenage clerk from Rubio's Hardware, had only done so by leaping out of a brittle, mildew-frosted window. Leaving the screams behind him, he ran, coated in blood, through the maze of vines. In a panic, he twisted his ankle and crawled onto a mossy clearing lit by the moonlight. Eventually, he was found by one of the police boats used in the search, piloted by a bewildered deputy, and taken back into town. When a second search party came across the old cabin, they found what was left of the group of men. They were gored to pieces, strewn everywhere. The townsfolk burned the house, and as it went up in flames, its ancient foundations finally gave way and it slid into the murky water. No one knew what happened to Leatherskin, but to this day, our little town still has one of the highest disappearance rates in the contiguous United States. Some say Leatherskin is still alive and well, thriving in the swamp, still feeding on children. At least this was the story told to us by Patrick. Once Patrick finished his yarn, he looked around at the group of kids in front of him, gauging our belief or lack thereof. To my side, little Lenny was quivering in his clown costume, his eyes darting around the mangroves. I was conflicted on its validity, but I can remember that with the passion the story was told, I felt inclined to believe him. If I had fully believed him, I might have been less enthusiastic when Patrick quickly suggested that we should all go into the swamp and hunt for Leatherskin ourselves. Since I watched Stand By Me, I yearned for the freedom item I had seen in media. With an hour to midnight, I leapt from my seat on the root and fervently supported Patrick's plan. He threw his arm around my shoulder and spoke to the rest of the children, goading them to follow my example. I started to wish that I kept my mouth shut because 5 minutes later, our little posse was trudging through the swamp. One or two decided not to come with us, instead following the trail back the way we came and into town. A few of us had flashlights given to us by our overprotective parents that, combined with the brief cracks of moonlight gazing through the canopy, guided our path. We stuck to the elevated and dry sods of earth as best we could. Despite my attempts, I could feel the hanging ends of my pant leg dampen. Marv and I tried to hang back, and we talked and laughed like a pair of hyenas. The air was wet with sound, cicadas, toads, and the flow of the nearby bayou. Suddenly, Patrick put a commanding hand up and told us all to stop. We did, and looked around trying to find what sparked our sudden halt. Patrick turned to us with a sinister smile and said that he'd seen movement along the banks of the creek. "It's Leatherskin," I remember Patrick shouting at us. Lenny's breath hitched as his older brother pushed him forward. Patrick saw what the siblings were doing and decided to take it further. He said something along the lines of, "You're the youngest. Leatherskin will want you." With that, we all started chanting, pressuring the kid to take a few more steps towards the water's edge. Clearly terrified, but even more afraid of what a group of older boys could do to him, he did. In his little white clown suit with blue and red polka dots, he took a series of anxious steps forward as we roared around him. Joking, I shouted, "Oh my god, is that Leatherskin?" Lenny whirled around, almost losing his balance and falling backwards into the water. Tears were streaking down his white face paint now. "Stop it, guys, you're not funny," he screamed as we all bent double, laughing at him. Those words are etched into my mind because they were his last. A torrent of water swept onto the thin, stony bank as a great weight slammed into Lenny, having bitten onto his submerged ankles. He cried out in pain and shock and fell to hands and knees as he was dragged backwards. I was paralyzed with fear, as were Patrick and Marv, but Lenny's brother rushed forward to fight off the black shape. It wasn't until he splashed into the water that we snapped out of our trance of regret and ran to Rob's side. He grabbed him and stopped him from running fully into the bayou as Lenny was dragged underwater by what we came to realize was an alligator. We all stood, soaking and staring at the carnage before us. The beast had begun to death roll, and Lenny's screams came in cycles and he repeatedly breached, and was then dragged under the water. Those same screams still rattle away in my nightmares, whenever my mind dares to dream. His dying breath was carried as a bubble to the black water surface. Within a minute, maybe less, the white froth brought up by the thrashing had dissipated. Our collective gaze followed the disturbance in the water as it slowly moved away, off towards the tangle of mangroves. Rob fell to his knees by my side and sobbed gently into his hands. I heard Patrick gulp and turned to watch him wordlessly walk away from us, back in the direction of the trail. Marv and I helped Rob to his unsteady feet and followed Patrick. As soon as we caught up to him, he whipped around and furiously warned us not to tell a soul what had happened tonight. I was inclined to follow his advice, as was Marv, but we both knew Rob couldn't. Patrick sighed and took Rob by his forearm and led him away from us. I looked at Marv confused, but he just shrugged. A small while later, the two returned. Rob was crying with even more devastation now, and Patrick just sniffed indifferently. When I returned home that night, just 15 minutes past midnight, my mother immediately knew something was wrong. Despite her persistence, I explained to her that I was blackout tired, and as it was over 3 hours past my bedtime, she let me go to sleep as soon as I came through the door. I cried for most of the night and stayed awake long enough to hear sirens wailing from, I assumed, Rob's house. In the morning, my mother came into my room and quietly sat on my bed. She told me in a soft and distant voice that Lenny, the little brother of my friend Rob, had been reported missing. She then asked me if I knew anything about it. I told her in a shaky voice that I didn't, and my reply was followed by a few minutes of silence. My mother then leaned in and hugged me. I started to cry into her shoulder, and after some point she pulled away, gave me a shallow smile and left to my room. They never found Lenny, of course, nor did they find his remains. I didn't see Rob much after that night, but I often heard from my parents that Lenny's mother and father had shattered. I stayed friends with Marv until I moved to Baton Rouge at 19. I rarely visited my hometown, but recently, my mother passed away. I haven't spoken to her in years, let alone seen her in person. The funeral was organized by my sister, who now lived in the family home with her own family. I stayed with her for a week or two during the mourning period, and got to know my nieces and nephews properly for the first time. A few days ago, I was browsing around a local shop, one I worked at in the summer of 1990. It hadn't changed much, and I realized the new owner was an old school friend of mine. I was walking down aisle 3 when I bumped into him. I almost didn't recognize him at first, but he recognized me. It was Rob. Guilt still clung to him like kudzu. I could tell it in his gray eyes and broken smile. His hands trembled as he restocked a shelf of canned goods, his wedding ring loose on his thinning fingers. He somehow seemed smaller than he was when we were 13. We talked and vowed to talk more again one day, then said our goodbyes. I'm still not sure how much detail he told his parents of what happened that night, or if he's ever made peace with his own conscience. This post is my own admission. I'm not sure if the stories of Leatherskin are true. I did, however, tell them to my young nieces and nephews in the hope they'll never venture near the swamp. Alligators infest these waters, and I'm certain it was one of those beasts that killed Lenny that night. I mean, what else could it be? I worked the night shift at a small local TV station in rural Montana. It's one of those jobs where you mostly just make sure nothing goes wrong with the automated broadcast system while everyone else is sleeping. 12 hours of mind-numbing boredom punctuated by occasional technical hiccups. At least that's what it was supposed to be. 3 weeks ago, I started noticing something strange happening during our 3 a.m. broadcast slot. We run old public domain movies during that time. Nobody's watching anyway, and it's cheap content to fill airtime. I was half asleep in the control room when I noticed something off about the black and white western playing on the monitor. There was a figure standing in the background of a scene where I could swear there hadn't been anyone before. It was just a silhouette, barely visible behind the main actors. I rewound the digital file, thinking maybe I just hadn't noticed it the first time through. But when I played it again, the figure was gone. I chalked it up to fatigue and too much coffee. Night shifts mess with your head, and I've seen weirder things while sleep deprived. But then it happened again the next night. This time it was during an old noir film. A woman was delivering a monologue in her apartment, and in the window behind her I saw a face peering in, just for a second before the camera angle changed. I jumped up and rewound the footage. Nothing there on the second viewing. I started recording our broadcast on my phone, thinking maybe there was some kind of transmission issue that was causing these glitches. The recording showed nothing unusual, but I kept seeing these anomalies on the live monitor. Fleeting shapes in the background, strange distortions in people's faces, background extras staring directly at the camera when they shouldn't be. Last week things escalated. The 3 a.m. slot was playing Night of the Living Dead, and halfway through, one of the zombie extras turned to face the camera and spoke. This wasn't part of the movie. I know because I've seen it dozens of times. The zombie's mouth moved, and though there was no audible sound, I could read the lips clearly. "We see you watching." I nearly fell out of my chair. I grabbed my phone and started recording, my hands shaking. When I played back the clip I'd recorded, the zombie was just shuffling around mindlessly like it was supposed to. But I know what I saw on the monitor. I tried telling my supervisor, but he just laughed it off. "Classic night shift paranoia," he said. "Take some vitamin D supplements. The lack of sunlight is getting to you." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just sleep deprived and imagining things. I considered requesting a schedule change, but the weird part is, I didn't want to. Something kept drawing me back to those late night broadcasts. I needed to know what was happening. 4 nights ago, I made a discovery. I noticed that these anomalies only appeared on broadcast signals, never on the digital files themselves. Something was intercepting or altering our broadcast between the station and the transmission. I set up a second monitor connected directly to our antenna feed to compare with our studio output. That night, the differences between the two feeds were undeniable. While the Maltese Falcon played normally on the studio monitor, the broadcast version showed subtle but unsettling differences. Background characters moved differently, scene transitions lingered a beat too long, and Humphrey Bogart's eyes, they were solid black like empty sockets. I started documenting everything, taking photos of both screens side by side. The photos showed the differences clear as day, so it wasn't just in my head. Something or someone was hijacking our broadcast signal. Last night I decided to stay after my shift ended at 6 a.m. to talk to the morning crew about what I'd found. That's when I made the most disturbing discovery yet. When the morning shift manager arrived, she looked at me strangely. "What are you doing here, Alex? You're not scheduled until tonight." I told her I had just finished my shift, but she shook her head and showed me the schedule on her tablet. According to the official record, I hadn't worked last night, or the night before, or any night in the past 2 weeks. but I had been here. I had the photos on my phone to prove it. Except when I checked my phone, the photos were gone, the recordings were gone, everything was gone. The only evidence I had was a single text message I had sent to myself at 3:17 a.m. last night that simply read, "It's replacing us one by one." I don't remember sending that message. I went home in a daze, convinced I was losing my mind. When I arrived at my apartment, my key didn't work. After several attempts, my neighbor came out and asked if I needed help. "Hey, are you looking for Alex?" she asked, not recognizing me. "He moved out about 2 weeks ago. Are you a friend of his?" I stood there unable to speak. How could she not recognize me? I've lived next door to her for 3 years. I managed to mumble something about having the wrong apartment and walked away. I'm writing this now from a motel room, using a laptop I bought today. I don't know who or what has taken over the broadcast, but I think it's spreading beyond the signal now. Tonight at 3 a.m., every TV in this town will be airing our public domain movie slot. I don't know how many people might be watching: insomniacs, night shift workers, people who fall asleep with their TVs on, but I know something will be watching back through those screens. I'm going back to the station tonight. I need to find a way to stop the broadcast. If you're reading this and you live in a small town with a local TV station, do me a favor. Don't watch anything that airs at 3 a.m. And if you see someone who looks exactly like you walking around, run. Every summer when I was a child, my family would visit our relatives in the northwest of Ireland, in a rural, low-populated region. Leaving our home in England, we would road trip through Scotland before taking a ferry across the Irish Sea, driving a further 3 hours through the last frontier of the United Kingdom. My 2 older brothers and I would know when we were close to our relative's farm, because the country roads would suddenly turn bumpy as hell. The northwest of Ireland is a breathtaking part of the country. Its Atlantic coastway is wild and rugged, with pastoral green hills and misty mountains. The villages are very traditional, surrounded by numerous farms, cow, and sheep fields. My family and I would always stay at my grandmother's farmhouse, which stands out a mile away due its bright red-painted coating. These relatives are from my mother's side, and although the northwest, and even the rest of Ireland for that matter, is very sparsely populated, my mother's family is extremely large. She has a dozen siblings, which was always mind-blowing to me, and what's more, I have so many cousins I've yet to meet them all. I always enjoyed these summer holidays on the farm, where I would spend every day playing around the grounds and feeding the different farm animals. Although I usually played with my 2 older brothers on the farm, by the time I was 12, they were too old to play with me and would rather go round to one of our cousins' houses nearby to either ride dirt bikes or play video games. So I was mostly stuck on the farm by myself. Luckily, I had one cousin, Grana, who lived close by and was around my age. Grana was a tomboy, and so we more or less liked the same activities. I absolutely loved it here, and so did my brothers and my dad. In fact, we loved the northwest of Ireland so much, we even talked about moving here. But for some strange reason, although my mum was always missing her family, she was dead against any ideas of relocating. Whenever we asked her why, she would always have a different answer. There weren't enough jobs, it's too remote, and so on. But unfortunately for my mum, we always left the family decisions to a majority vote, and so if the 4 out of 5 of us wanted to relocate to the northwest of Ireland, we were going to. On one of these summer evenings on the farm, and having neither my brothers or Gran to play with, my uncle Dave, who ran the family farm, asks me if I'd like to come with him to see a baby calf being born on one of the nearby farms. Having never seen a newborn calf before, I enthusiastically agreed to tag along. Driving for 10 minutes down the bumpy country road, we pull outside the entrance of a rather large cow field, where, waiting for my uncle Dave, were 3 other farmers. Knowing how big my Irish family was, I assumed I was probably related to these men too. Getting out of the car, these 3 farmers stare instantly at me, appearing both shocked and angry. Striding up to my uncle Dave, one of the farmers yells at him, "What the hell's this Wayne doing here?" Taken back a little by the hostility, I then hear my uncle Dave reply, "He needs to know. You know as well as I do they can't move here." Feeling rather uncomfortable by this confrontation, I was now somewhat confused. What do I need to know? And more importantly, why can't we move here? Before I can turn to Uncle Dave to ask him, the 4 men quickly halt their bickering and enter through the field gate entrance. Following the men into the cow field, the late evening had turned dark by now, and not wanting to ruin my good trainers by stepping in any cow paths, I walked very cautiously and slowly. So slow in fact, I'd gotten separated from my uncle's group, trying to follow the voices through the darkness and thick grass. I suddenly stopped in my tracks, because in front of me, staring back with unblinking eyes, was a very large cow, so large I at first mistook it for a bull. In the past, my Uncle Dave had warned me not to play in the cow fields because if cows are with their calves, they may charge at you. Seeing this huge cow staring stonewall at me, I really was quite terrified, because already knowing how freakishly fast cows can be, I knew if it charged at me, there was little chance I would outrun it. Thankfully, the cow stayed exactly where it was, before losing interest in me and moving on. I know it sounds ridiculous talking about my terrifying encounter with a cow, but I was a city boy after all. Although I regularly fed the cows on the family farm, these animals still felt somewhat alien to me, even after all these years. Brushing off my close encounter, I continued to try and find my Uncle Dave. I eventually found them on the far side of the field's corner. Approaching my uncle's group, I then see they're not alone. Standing by them were 3 more men and a woman, all dressed in farmer's clothing. But surprisingly, my cousin Granna was also with them. I go over to Gran to say hello, but she didn't even seem to realize I was there. She was too busy staring over at something behind the group of farmers. Curious as to what Granna was looking at, I move around to get a better look, and what I see is another cow, just a regular red cow, laying down on the grass. Getting out my phone to turn on the flashlight, I quickly realized this must be the cow that was giving birth. Its stomach was swollen, and there were patches of blood stained on the grass around it. But then I saw something else. On the other side of this red cow, nestled in the grass beneath the bushes, was the calf, and rather sadly it was stillborn. But what greatly concerned me wasn't that this calf was dead. What concerned me was its appearance. Although the calf's head was covered in red slimy fur, the rest of it wasn't. The rest of it didn't have any fur at all, just skin. And what made every single fiber of my body crawl was that this calf's body, its brittle infant body, it belonged to a human. Curled up into a fetal position, its head was indeed that of a calf. But what I should have been seeing as 2 front and hind legs were instead 2 human arms and legs, no longer or shorter than my own. Feeling terrified and at the same time in disbelief, I leave the calf, or whatever it was, to go back to Granna, all the while turning to shine my flashlight on the calf as though to see if it still had the same appearance. Before I can make it back to the group of adults, Gran stops me. With a look of concern on her face, she stares silently back at me before she says, "You're not supposed to be here, it was supposed to be a secret." Telling her that Uncle Dave had brought me, I then ask what the hell that thing was. "I'm not allowed to tell you," she says. "This was supposed to be a secret." 20 or 30 so minutes later, we were all standing around as though waiting for something, before the lights of a vehicle pull into the field and a man gets out to come over to us. This man wasn't a farmer, he was some sort of veterinarian. Uncle Dave and the others bring him to tend to the calf's mother, and as he did, me and Gran were made to wait inside one of the men's tractors. We sat inside the tractor for what felt like hours. Even though it was summer, the night was very cold, and I was only wearing a soccer jersey and shorts. I tried prying Grande for more information as to what was going on, but she wouldn't talk about it, or at least wasn't allowed to talk about it. Luckily, my determination for answers got the better of her, because more than an hour later, with nothing but the cold night air and awkward silence to accompany us both, Gran finally gave in. This happens every couple of years to all the farms here, but we're not supposed to talk about it, it brings bad luck. I then remembered something. When my dad said he wanted us to move here, my mum was dead against it. If anything, she looked scared just considering it. Almost afraid to know the answer, I work up the courage to ask Granna, "Does my mum know about this?" Sat stiffly in the driver's seat, Granna cranes her neck round to me. Of course she knows, Granna reveals. Everyone here knows. It made sense now. No wonder my mum didn't want to move here. She never even seemed excited whenever we planned on visiting, which was strange to me because my mum clearly loved her family. I then remembered something else. A couple of years ago, I remember waking up in the middle of the night inside the farmhouse, and I could hear the cows on the farm screaming. The screaming was so bad I couldn't even get back to sleep that night. The next morning, rushing through my breakfast to go play on the farm, Uncle Dave firmly tells me and my brothers to stay away from the cowshed. He didn't even and give an explanation. Later on that night, after what must have been a good 3 hours, my Uncle Dave and the others come over to the tractor. Shaking Uncle Dave's hand, the veterinarian then gets in his vehicle and leaves out the field. I then noticed 2 of the other farmers were carrying a black bag or something, each holding separate ends as they walked. I could see there was something heavy inside, and my first thought was they were carrying the dead calf, or whatever it was, away. Appearing as though everyone was leaving now, Uncle Dave comes over to the tractor to say we're going back to the farmhouse, and that we would drop Grana home along the way. Having taken Gran home, we then make our way back along the country road, where both me and Uncle Dave sat in complete silence. Uncle Dave driving, just staring at the stretch of road in front of us, and me staring silently at him. By the time we get back to the farmhouse, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and the farm was dead silent. Pulling up outside the farm, Uncle Dave switches off the car engine. Without saying a word, we both remain in silence. I felt too awkward to ask him what I had just seen, but I knew he was waiting for me to do so. Still not saying a word to one another, Uncle Dave turns from the driver's seat to me, and he tells me everything Gran wouldn't. "Don't you see now why you can't move here?" he says. "There's something wrong with this place, son. This place is cursed. Your mammy knows. She's known since she was a Wayne. That's why she doesn't want you living here." Yo, so why does this happen? I ask him. "This has been happening for generations, son. For hundreds of years, the animals in the county have been giving birth to these things." The way my Uncle Dave was explaining all this to me, it was almost like a confession. Like he'd wanted to tell the truth about what's been happening here all his life. It's not just the cows, it's the pigs, the sheep, the horses, and even the dogs. The dogs, it's always the same. They have the head as normal, but the body's always different. It was only now, after a long and terrifying night, that I suddenly started to become emotional. And I was completely exhausted. Realizing this was all too much for a young boy to handle, I think my Uncle Dave tried to put my mind at ease. "Don't you worry, son. They never live." Although I wanted all the answers, I now felt as though I knew far too much. But there was one more thing I still wanted to know. What do they do with the bodies? "Don't you worry about it, son. Just tell your mammy that you know. But don't go telling your brothers or your daddy now. She never wanted them knowing." By the next morning, and constantly rethinking everything that happened the previous night, I look around the farmhouse for my mom. Thankfully, she was alone in her bedroom folding clothes, and so I took the opportunity to talk to her in private. Entering her room, she asks me how it was seeing a calf being born for the first time. Staring back at her warm smile, my mouth opens to make words, but nothing comes out, and instantly, my mom knows what's happened. "I could kill your Uncle Dave," she says. "He said it was going to be a normal birth." Breaking down in tears right in front of her, my mom comes over to comfort me in her arms. "It's okay, chicken, there's no need to be afraid." After she tried explaining to me what Grana and Uncle Dave had already told me, her comforting demeanor suddenly turned serious. Clasping her hands upon each side of my arms, my mum crouches down, eyes level with me, and with the most serious look on her face I'd ever seen, she demands of me, "Listen, chicken, whatever you do, don't you dare go telling your brothers or your dad. They can never know. It's going to be our little secret, okay?" Still with tears in my eyes, I nod a silent yes to her. "Good man yourself," she says. We went back home to England a week later. I never told my brothers or my dad the truth of what I saw, of what really happens on those farms, and I refused to ever step foot inside the northwest of Ireland again.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.